Roux says South Africa needs more consequence management. He says that if all South Africans can do the right thing, the country can turn around its fortunes drastically. For more, we are joined in studio by Senior Policy Fellow at the South African Institute of Race Relations, Roux. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Liesl. It's nice to be here.
So, Zach, you obviously wrapped up a 3-day conference unpacking some of the major issues, including the consequence management approach. Before we delve into all of that, I want to look at some of the root causes of what might contributed to accountability or lack thereof within the sector.
I would think that the biggest problem is that there's a lot of people that get away without any consequences in doing what is wrong for this country. And what is wrong for this country is obvious. We can see that in the economy and we can see that in the poor, which really ends up paying for bribery and corruption in this country.
Yeah.
Although it's the taxpayers' money that is wasted, it is tax money that should have gone to the poor. Therefore, some of them are really being killed. You know, if you're a poor person, you have to rely on the government to look after your medical aid, to look after your housing, and those kind of things go missing when funds are misappropriated.
So in terms of the consequence management approach, I mean, what are some of the structures or mechanisms that can or need to be put in place to ensure that there are consequences and that they're dealt with?
That's a very interesting question. The first aspect of that is, do we have the right laws in place? And we have. Do we have the right structures in place? And yes, we have. So what is going wrong then, right?
Exactly.
And I think it is not the political will to prosecute in many cases. There are people that are in positions of power that abuses this. And because they are in positions of power, they are almost untouchable. And we've seen that in the past with so many high-profile cases where it is just justice delayed, and justice delayed becomes justice denied.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at how the conference has grown and perhaps some of the practices of corporate governance, perhaps more ethical methods and conducts for that matter. I mean, how would you measure the success rate of the conference and also its impact on the ears that it has fallen to and approached?
I've been involved with the Institute of Internal Auditors now for almost 30 years, and I need to just correct, I'm not working for them at the moment.
Okay.
I was on their board before, and I have been the chairman of the Audit Conference Organizing Committee in the past.
Okay.
I've been speaking at the conferences ever since, though.
Thank you.
So I think what has happened is we've grown tremendously. I first started really in the Institute of Internal Auditors in the early 90s, and we've had around about 130 people at the first conference that I attended. And this time around, it was about 1,200 people. So we've grown tremendously. We also hosted the international conference for the Institute of Internal Auditors in 2010, which was a similar time that when we had the Soccer World Cup, right? Yes. So it looks like a lot of people were coming to this country at the time. So the Institute has grown very, very big and very successfully. Our challenge is now, how do we protect our chief audit executives from being victimized? And a lot of them are actually starting to wave the flag, but they are also drowning some of them.
Yes.
You might have seen in the news that there was a murder attempt on the SABC's head of internal audit.
Yeah.
And this is not unique. I found so many internal auditors of my colleagues that have raised the flag, and then rather than dealing with the message, they try to kill the messengers.
A key point that came out from your address at the conference is that you urge South Africans to do the right thing. What does that look like?
I think we need education, and we need to set the right example for the next generation. If people can get away with doing crime, and corruption and bribery is just part of that, but if they can get away with that with impunity, that is the lesson that the next generation basically learns from that. And how would we expect them then to do anything different? The problem with this is we're kicking down the can to the next generation all the time if we don't deal with this very, very stingy issue. And this issue needs to be addressed so that our grandchildren and the next generations after that doesn't inherit a country that has been totally looted.
And it also probably speaks to the brand positioning and driving investor confidence as well, when you've got clean audits and people are able to trust you. I mean, what is the importance, rather, of consequence management in a global sphere for South Africa and its positioning?
Quite right. And I think we might be in for a high jump when we look at the rating agencies now again, because they're looking at South Africa. And what has happened and I think the biggest factor here is just our government debt. And it's been growing very steadily. We are raising a lot of money through the taxpayer base, although we're in a downturn and it's a little bit more difficult now. But what has happened to that money hasn't been uplifting the country in the way that it should have. It hasn't created the jobs that it should have. And we always refer to the thin man, fat man approach. We have to think, who's carrying who? Is it the private sector that carries government, or is it government carrying the private sector? And obviously, the tax comes from the private sector. Now, if we have an overgrown and very fat government sector, the thin man trying to carry him is not going to make it. So we have to support the private sector much more and get the private sector to be clean and not to be part of the problem, but part of the solution. And when we have a good governance in the private sector, then investment will flow. And that will make the whole country more rich.
I'm wondering about the conference that's just wrapped up now. I mean, we saw Chief Justice Mogoeng obviously being a recipient of the Chairman's Award.
Yes.
How did he manage to receive that? I know previous recipients included former Public Protector Tuli Madonsela, amongst many others.
That's right. We have the Guardian of Governance Award every year. And this year it went to the Chief Justice Mogoeng. And it is based on what he is doing for good governance in this country. And you can see from all the press releases that he is quite hard on the corruption and the graft and the looting that is happening in this country. And I think he is one of those change makers in South Africa that will make this country great again.
I'm looking at how the conference has grown. You mentioned it started with 130 people. There were over 2,000 people this time round.
1,200.
1,200.
That's right.
What are your expectations from here into and beyond in terms of it being a legacy project as well for yourself?
Well, I hope it grows, but it's not just about growing. It's about the people needs to also do their jobs well. So we want to have quality. And that's why the Institute of Internal Auditors also do quality assurance reviews. And part of our standards is to make sure that the quality of internal audit is on standard with international standards. And I think South Africa is leading in many cases on internal audit.
So that would have been my next question. Where do we stand in terms of the global sphere positioning as well?
That's right. I think a lot of profile was given to internal audit in two areas. In the private sector, it was through the King Report.
Yes.
And in the public service, our PFMA and Treasury regulations are actually very progressive. As I said before, we have good laws, we've got good protocols, we've got really good standards, we've got good reports. The problem lies in the implementations and the political will in many cases. There are many reports that auditors bring out that point out where the problems are. And those reports and even the evidence is available, but it gets stopped halfway to prosecution. So the prosecution doesn't happen when it should.
I'm just also wondering that at the heart of this all are individuals, and the conscientizing or mindset shift of individuals needs to occur as well for them to morally hold themselves, I guess, obligated to what consequence management and the consequences thereof entail as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that mindset shift also happens. But thank you very much for joining us. And of course, as you've wrapped, I'm sure you're super tired as well. So I'm going to let you leave you to that. Of course, we had Zach Roux just chatting to us about the three-day conference that wrapped, urging South Africans rather to do the right thing. It was the Institute of Internal Auditors that held a conference, a big approach there highlighting the consequence management and perhaps its effectiveness for South Africa, its positioning in the global sphere, and the morale within the country at large. Now, when we return, we take you to the Northwest Province, where we start with the issues flagged by the Auditor General's report on municipal spending, and then we take you to Americana. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.